Hello, class. Here we go into a study of the history of, or a survey of the history of theater from early times all the way to the modern ages. And we'll start with actually the origin of theater. And this chapter will be on the growth of Western theater. But where did theater start? We look at three different possibilities. And as you can see from the picture here, again, primitive societies, would, gather around the fire after a hunt and celebrate. And they were basically, nature controlled early man. They were at the mercy of nature. So, they had to survive. So if they had a good hunt, they might come back and sit around the fire and tell about it, tell stories about it. And those stories would develop into, maybe over time, would just develop and become more elaborate. So then you have storytelling, and that's a type of theater. And also, just imagine, you had a successful hunt, you killed the mastodon, and you could feed a group of people for a month on a mastodon, and people would sit around and maybe they had some fermented beverage that they got a little loopy, and then maybe people start dancing around, and and then the thing about oral history, because this is pre-literate history, this is pre-written history, people remember story in oral history. So a story could be passed on for generations, for hundreds of years. Oh, so tell us a story about that hunt that, great Uncle Louis, was on. And then it would be enacted, and it would be danced out. And so that develops, and that's really a type of theater. Again, it's our natural inclination to tell stories and to be with community, and, being around a fire or in a celebration in a circle, that would be an origin. Also, again, ritual plays part too, because man is controlled by nature. They have to, pay obeisance to it, obey it. And they were controlled. The sun, the wind, the rain, everything, they were at the mercy of all of these. So they would assign gods to these forces, and they would, worship and plead and pray with them. And out of that, you get ritual, and out of that, you get religion. So that formalized worship, takes on, a type of movement, takes on a type of outfit or costume, and becomes ritualized, just like the Indian rain dance. Starts out, well, maybe they had a serious drought, and they hadn't had water for months and weeks, and even maybe years, and they would say, well, let's do this, let's do this kind of pleading, and then lo and behold, it starts to rain. So, well, that worked that year, so maybe let's do it again next year. So you repeat these rituals that seem to help and calm the gods and pay homage to the gods, and then you get ritual, and out of that you get a type of performance. And again, religion and theater are really very closely aligned. They're both communal, they're both presentational, and there's a spiritual aspect to both of them. Obviously, more so with worship. So, ritual in ancient Egypt, before the golden age of the Greek civilizations, which is really where we mark Western civilization, and then Roman right after that. We had an amazing civilization in ancient Egypt that predated the Roman era, and there was an Abydos passion play, which is the story of Isis and Osiris. It's a birth story, and they were gods, they were kings, they were rulers, they were gods and goddesses, and this passion play, telling the story, played for 2,500 to 2,000 years. 2,000 years, and basically we're in 2020 right now. So 2,000 years ago, we would have been in the year 100. That's how much long of a time this civilization in Egypt, flourished. And so it's just important to know that, that everything predates that. So the story of the birth and the basically the resurrection of Osiris was played out by priests and masks, and it was a parade, and it was done in each town, and it would be a big passion play like the passion plays that we have nowadays. And so that really predates the golden age of Greece. In ancient Greece, again, really, this golden era was really about the time that Greece became kind of a democracy and got away from the rulers and the just being ruled by one force. And so in that time, that age of enlightenment, all these things happened in science and art and literature and plays. So the plays were done in these day-long performances that were basically, they had spring and fall, again, lining with the seasons, like, Easter and, the spring season. They didn't celebrate Easter then, but again, there were spring festivals. The Dionysian festival, the god of grape, the god of wine, so celebration and harvest. And then in the fall too, the bringing in of the harvest too. So they had two main times when they celebrate, much like we do. We have those kind of celebrations too. So they did a series of plays that started literally at dawn, and people would assemble in these massive stadia, and you can get a picture of how small the people were and how many people you could get in one seating area. And again, these were all stone, so the acoustics from here were amazing. And so they did a series of plays. And the idea of, originally they were just basically, they started out as just kind of group dances by the chorus people dancing, but then according to legend, one character named Thespis stepped out from the chorus and began kind of acting or presenting the story. And so he was credited with being the first actor. So the term thespian comes from this character Thespis. And they use masks because, again, if you look at this space, to have a mask here to project that far out, and the masks also had like little megaphones built into them. So again, it was larger than life. People couldn't enlarge the screen, so they use masks to present their characters. Again, as time went on, the stages got more elaborate. This is a scena, the scene house. And so the proscena, the in front of the scena, becomes the proscenium. And this is the orchestra that was a playing space in those days. And then gradually by the Middle Ages, that became a seating area. So that the term orchestra seating was where the rich people would eventually sit nowadays. And there was periactoi. Even in those days, they had some kind of way to do set changes. They had like a triangle that would rotate, like the billboards that you see that they flip over. They would periactoi. They would rotate around with different colored designs on them. And the mechane, I think we talked about the crane that would come over and hoist the gods over the scena when the gods would appear. So they were still, even in that era, they had some technology. There were three great playwrights of the Greek era: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus is considered the father of modern or Western theater, and he introduced the second actor. There was only one actor in the chorus, and there were two actors. And there were only 7 of his plays survived that period. But there is a complete trilogy, the Oresteia, which is the story about Agamemnon coming home from the war and bringing his concubine, and of course Clytemnestra, his wife, didn't like that, so she kills him. And then Orestes and Electra, who were the children of Agamemnon are paying revenge on their mother. So it was basically a big family tragedy. And this played out over 3 episodes. The Greek plays were really very bloody. I mean, people were being literally cooked up and fed to, fed to the people. But the whole idea was really a learning thing, that you knew these myths, you knew these stories, and out of that you learned about what is proper behavior. Sophocles, maybe one of the most famous, because he wrote Oedipus, he wrote Antigone, and he basically reduced the chorus from about 50 down to about 15. He added a third actor, so then all of a sudden it really became more dramatic. And the actors, the lead actors stayed the same, but the second and third actors would change masks and come in as different characters. So his structures are very clean and very tight. You have in your play selection, you have both Antigone and Oedipus to look at and respond to. You can see the structure of them as you proceed with it. Euripides is considered the most modern of the 3 playwrights. He came later, and he was kind of a little bit of a rebel, and his characters were kind of quirky, and he favored strong women and complicated women, and none more so than Medea. And a lot of people portray, of course, Medea is known for, she was the one who killed her kids. But if you look deeper in the story, she was a tortured woman. She was basically married to Jason, Jason and the Golden Fleece, and he came back to his home country, and she was a foreign woman. So he is bringing a foreign woman back to the country, and he then kind of ditches her and goes after another woman. So he kind of ditches her. So this is a woman who's scorned and frustrated and living in a foreign country, and she's left here all abandoned, basically. So the only thing that she has to pay her revenge on Jason is the children. So yes, it's a horrible, horrific act, but she was motivated by revenge and by hurt. So again, you can find ways to see behind just the facade of Medea and play her more 3-dimensionally. Then the Greek people loved comedy too. There was we call this old comedy, because old comedy was kind of very silly and irreverent. In the big play festivals, they had 3, like the Oresteia would play all day long, and in between each version there would be a satyr play or a very funny kind of comic interlude. So they like to laugh too, but they separated the serious and the funny. And again, this is pre-Christian time, so they did not have the same kind of moral parameters that we grew up with in our Western world, later Western world. So they were much more irreverent. They had no problem making fun of senators and famous people. There were bawdy. There were fart jokes. There were shows. I can play you. In fact, I'll play you this little clip of Lysistrata, which is basically a sex comedy. Again, like Saturday Night Live, making fun of people. And Aristophanes is really the only surviving playwright, and even his play it's only a segment that you see. We only have fragments of his one or two of his plays. But Lysistrata is basically a play about women wanting to stop men from fighting the war. So it's an anti-war play, but they do that by withholding sex. So basically, the men come back from war and obviously want to bond with the women, and so they won't let them. Now, the comedy also comes from, you have to realize that they weren't played by men and women. Men were playing women, and then obviously there were men. So the men playing the women would be really, they would, really exaggerate their feminine, the bosoms, and also at that time the men had swinging phalluses, oversized penises, basically, that they would literally hang with them. So very low comedy. So to get an idea of that, I'm going to play you a little clip from a college production that kind of captures a little bit of that silliness and craziness. And let me just pull this up. Okay, notice these are, yes, that's what they think, that's what you think they are. Those are swinging phalluses, and that's the size. So they'd have these exaggerated phalluses, because again, this is kind of comedy.
Beasts that thou hast wrought, what monsters worse than womanly? Who shall encompass with his thoughts their endless strides? Let me tell you, no more! They seize the heights, the rocks, the
Okay, yes, and you see the kind of comedy here where he's, using this man's phallus for emphasis. So silly kind of comedy. Okay, so moving on. Actually, I'm sorry. Aristophanes did have several plays. It was the Roman comedic playwright who I was talking about. Menander was the one who had just extents, a few plays extant. We had the new comedy, which was more like romantic comedy of today. Just family comedy, where typically there were lovers who wanted to get together and there were opposing families, but things basically ended up well. So basically it was like a typical kind of plot that you might see today. Warring families, but basically things end up well at the end. So that's categorized as a comedy if it ends well and it's domestic. So the Greeks like this type of play as well. Aristotle came along at the end of the golden age of Greece, and really at that point he was cataloging everything in science and mathematics and everything. So he cataloged drama, and he looked at what the great playwrights were doing, which was like Sophocles, specifically plays like Antigone and Oedipus, and saw that they all had a unity of action. They all took place in one location. They're the characters, that the heroes had some kind of flaw with them. There was something that had this kind of irretrievability about their fates, and the audience would feel fear and pity for them. And at the end, they'd have this catharsis, this release of emotion where, like, there, but for the grace of God go I. So he was important in really, categorizing drama, and then a lot of, theorists after him. He was really the first, theater theorists. That was pretty much Greek. Let's go to Rome. And the thing about Roman theater basically is that they conquered Greece, and they basically co-opted everything that the Greeks did. They just did their own versions. It's like getting a play where or a song where you do a cover version of it, So a lot of the same stories, a lot of the same myths, but they just did new versions of them. They were more visceral. Women were definitely allowed here we don't really have documentation that women were allowed in the Greek audiences. However, you can look at the size of the stadia and know that probably women were. That would be, let's, half the population. So, but we don't have hard evidence of that. Plautus was a domestic comedian. His characters were all this kind of stock characters we looked at when we started. We discovered, we talked about different types of characters, the stock character and the representative character. And so again, in this world, you had servants and you had masters, and so you had this kind of hierarchy. So it was easy to make fun of that kind of society. And again, a lot of the comedy was with the servants, because they were generally in a flipped situation in a comedy, it was the servants who had were basically smarter and outwitting all their masters. Here's a clip. Here's a short clip from Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. This is a scene where there's complications and there's two servants that are trying to help help a young lover get his mate, and there's kind of this old guy who's actually played by Buster Keaton, and he's kind of confused, and they're kind of leading him on. And in this short little segment, Buster Keaton we need a soothsayer, so Zero Mostel, who plays the services, so he's acting like he's the soothsayer, and it's kind of comedy. It's this kind of comedy of character. I'll play a short clip of that. Nope. There we go.
Fetch me a soothsayer. A soothsayer? He must search my house at once. Sir, you're in need of a soothsayer. How did you know? I'd be a fine soothsayer if I didn't. Well, there's a spirit in my house. Silence! I'm about to say the truth. I see it. I see everything. You have been abroad for 20 years. You have been searching for a child. No, two childs. A fine big boy and a strange little boy.
Okay, so you can see the kind of comedy we've got there with these two servants kind of spoofing, and this gullible old man who happens to be a master. So all that kind of comedy played out. Then we also have tragic playwrights, and the most famous of that period was Seneca, and he again took the plays that were done by Aeschylus and Euripides and Sophocles and did rewrites. But he minimized the chorus. So over the time, the chorus became very minimal, and he not only did unity of action, but time and play. So he was paying attention to this idea of keeping everything really contained. And in the Roman times, the violence happened on stage. It was visceral. Whereas in the Greek times, like for instance, people didn't die necessarily on stage. Oedipus, who put his eyes out because he realized that he was living a world of deep sin, did that off stage and then came back. If the Romans did that, you would see that on stage, and he would be, gouging his eyes out, and you'd have blood packs or something in there. So also Seneca had little soliloquies where the actor would step forward and speak to the audience, or asides, like so talking like this. And these were techniques that influenced Shakespeare. Shakespeare did a lot of use of soliloquies, hundreds of years later. So Seneca is important, and Seneca's not done a lot, but there are versions of every once in a while in a college production might do Seneca, a Senecan tragedy, but not a lot. So mostly known as an influence of Shakespeare later on, because Shakespeare stole from everybody, and so he stole from Seneca too. The Roman theaters looked a lot like the Greeks, but they were more built up. They could be freestanding, since they were great builders, building colosseums and roads. They could make a freestanding space, and it was just larger. Their scena got more massive, and the orchestra that was circular in Greek times now becomes semicircular, and they started seating dignitaries in the orchestra. So that was the point when you started having the special audience members coming down to the orchestra. Here's an actual clip, a look at an existing Roman theater. So notice how it's built in against a hill, but it's all freestanding. And I don't believe in that climate there was ever a roof. They had larger timbers at that time, but I don't think they had timbers that were that big to cover a roof like that. So these were still open air, and they would have their performances in the daytime. And so I think that is the end of our look at Roman theater. So we go on right on. We have one more, and that is the Middle Ages, which is after the fall of Rome and the beginning of Christianity. So that was about 500 to 1500. So first, Christianity, hated the Roman plays and hated playwriting, basically, to begin with. But then they realized that in a pre-literate society where people didn't read, by dramatizing these biblical stories, that was a way to, tell them about, Christ and about, be good or you'll go to hell. So they had plays. They had short plays, Bible stories. They were one acts, and they would put them together and make a cycle. They also had plays that were morality plays, where they tried to teach you a lesson. And a very famous one here is Everyman, which is just like it sounds. It's a play about a person who is everyman, and he's basically traveling through life and looking for who's going to help him on the way to his grave and to heaven. So it's about basically doing good works. And here's a really short Lego version of that that I'll play for you too.
People don't appreciate me, and they sin all the time. Death. I'm here at your will, your commandment to fulfill. Bring every man to me for judgment. Okay, boss. There's every man. He doesn't even think I'm coming. Hey, every man, you're going down. Couldn't you give me a little more time? Let me think about it. No. Well, could I at least bring someone with me? If you can find someone. Yo, Everman, sup, dude? You don't look so good. Don't worry, man. I'm here for you. I'll party with you, kill someone with you. I'd even die for you. Hey, fellowship. Funny you should say that. I'm actually gonna die.
All right, so he goes to fellowship, he goes to riches, he goes to good deeds, and various other characters, and the only one who goes with him, I believe, is the good deeds. And so let's cut to the end of this.
Time for me to go watch Lost.
You watch that show too? I love that show. I'm all alone.
We're still here. All earthly things are but vanity. Beauty, strength, and discretion do man forsake. Foolish friends and kinsmen that fair spake. All flee save good deeds, and that.
Right, so all save good deeds. So beauty, friendship, discretion, whatever.
Am
I die.
And then he goes to heaven afterwards, and there's lots of versions of this play, but it's a really basic play, and it's still done. And a good director can, find different ways to contemporize it, like the Lego version. So, but it's a classic story from that period. The thing that changes here is the play structure starts to change. So we go from this kind of climactic enclosed structure to more of an episodic structure. So this is the first time we get this episodic structure here. Well, we're getting this mixture of comic and serious. The Second Shepherd's Play is a good example. This is about a bumbling couple who are shepherds, and they can't have a kid, or they're finding out not able to have kids. So they borrow someone's lamb, and so it's kind of a bumbling type of couple, but that's interspersed with the same time. It plays at the same time with the story of Christ in the manger. So you have a juxtaposition. This is the first time you're playing this kind of thing on stage, where you got this bumbling couple trying to take care of this little lamb who they've stolen, and then the birth of Christ. So you have this mixture here. So this is the first time in Western history that we see this kind of change. So this is a transitional period. No great plays, a lot of short plays, no great plays, but important in the transition of the writing. And then the play productions were done. Imagine that you're in a village square, like a festival, and all these places are set up where people perform, and this wood cutting is not very good, but this is actually a big like dragon's head, and they built a fire in here that would smoke would come out, and then occasionally people get thrown into hell. You know, they literally throw them in there. And the crafts guilds, you know, took part of that. The barrel maker did Noah's flood because they could build barrels and have water. These were all amateur actors. They were doing it for their religious reasons. And these festivals could last for a month. Again, spring festival, fall festival, that's still that same kind of calendar. And also the stages start changing. Now you have portable stages that you can do on a wagon. These were called mansions, basically it's really mansion, and a platform stage. So these simple kind of stages that again were basically starting to be used in Renaissance theater, more of just a bare bones kind of place where you could have these episodic productions and just pretend you're here, you're there, you're everywhere. So this was also kind of a transitional stage and important in setting up the next great period of time in Western theater, which is the Renaissance. And I believe that's all we have now, that we've covered the beginning of Western theater from early times through the Greek and the Romans and the Middle Ages. And the next thing we'll cover will be the Asian theater. So that's it for today. See you later.